We're gonna go ahead. Okay, if we want to have a productive class and I need to be able to hear myself think, y'all can't whisper the corn song in the front row. Now, if those of y'all that are in the back want to whisper about the corn song, that's totally fine. I hear you a little bit less. Well, let's get other things stuck in your head. How about that? Okay. Yeah. Well, I haven't graded it yet. I am starting it this afternoon. You will get them back by Wednesday. Because I had the cognitive stuff to grade, and between 2 days of Board of Trustees, the very last thing that I wanted to do on Saturday after I was done was grade. I was like, bleh, I'm gonna go be a slug for a couple of hours. So I will start that after class. Trying to think if there's anything else. So it was brought to my attention that some of you might like an extra day in class where you can meet with your groups and work on your project for a class period. I am totally willing to do that. However, remember that I'm always like one of your parents on a road trip trying to make really good time. So if we have a day in class where you are basically just working on your project, do be aware that I will be recording something that you will need to make time to watch outside of class as a way to kind of pay for the day you get to work, because we want to make a good schedule, and the time between the second exam and the third exam is the shortest. So yeah, sorry. No, it isn't. It's due on November 14th. Yeah, it's in your syllabus. Like all deadlines and due dates are in your syllabus. I'm really glad you asked that, because that way we're not going to have any unpleasant surprises where it's the 14th and I'm like, time for your projects, and you're like, what? And so I'm really glad that you asked, so y'all can start working on it. So do we want to have, I want to put this to the class, because I didn't want to unilaterally make a decision without your input. Do we want to have a class period where you work on your projects? Okay, all in favor, raise your hand. All opposed, raise your hand. Anybody who does not care, AKA abstention, raise your hand. Okay, so the ayes have it. We have a majority. What day do you want that to be? Soon? Do y'all want Halloween? That'd be 2 weeks that's 2 weeks from when your project is due. So let's go ahead, and next Monday, I will bring snacks and you can work on your project. So I do expect this to be productive. So if you want to bring in materials, that is totally fine. If you want to ask me questions, if you want me to bring in sample projects, I can do that, but I do expect you to work. It's not going to be, you can goof off a little. Come on, it's y'all. You always goof off a little. I expect y'all to goof off a little, but we can't goof off the whole class period. Okay, does that sound good?
I'm sorry.
You don't need to apologize. So just a reminder on October 31st, we will not be talking about any lecture content. I will expect you to be working on your projects. We'll meet here in class. I will bring Halloween treats, and I will have something for you to watch that you will need to make time for outside of class, okay? And by the way, I do track view counts. I don't necessarily know who is watching, but I know when I post a video when 3 people watch it versus like 20. So just to keep that in mind. All right, other few announcements. The quiz for this week is due Friday at 5, since it covers chapter 8, and we just started making headway on that on Friday, okay? It is very stuffy in here. If you feel like you need to fan yourself, that will be fine.
It's hot and humid.
It's hot and humid and we have no AC. All right. So the last time we were here, we were doing a bunch of different types of puzzles and things like that. We did puzzles with matchsticks. We did puzzles with mounting candles on a bulletin board. And now we're talking about making decisions and forming judgments. So we make hundreds of judgments and decisions basically based on our gut feelings or our experiences pretty much at any given opportunity. And most of the time, we are not necessarily thinking through the consequences of those actions. Most of those decisions don't necessarily require a lot of systematic reasoning and thought. They don't. Like, probably today, what you wear kind of matters. So for example, I wore my boots today specifically because I knew it would be raining all day. And if there's one thing I hate more than anything, it is wet socks. I do not enjoy wet socks. I also made sure I'm really prissy with my hair, and I know if it's humid, my hair is going to go flat. So I didn't do anything cute with it today, just pulled it back because I knew what was going to happen. But most of the time, we don't do this kind of thinking through things. So we have two different types of heuristics that we are going to talk about in depth. And just as a reminder from Friday, a heuristic is one of our problem-solving strategies. It can also be used to make judgments or make decisions. And a heuristic is a very simple rule of thumb. It is a very quick thinking strategy. And generally, you'll get a solution very quickly, but it's also prone to being biased. So we're going to talk about two different ones. We're going to talk about the representativeness heuristic and the availability heuristic. Both of these were identified and described by cognitive psychologists, Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman. So I think I've mentioned this before, bless you. The Nobel Prize, there is no Nobel Prize in psychology. And that's because the Nobel Prize was established well before psychology was ever a formal discipline. But occasionally you will have psychologists, and generally they're going to be in cognitive psychology, that win the Nobel Prize in economics, because a lot of economic decision making is very similar to the way that you and I make judgments and decisions. So there's a lot of overlap between cognitive psych and economics. So Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman are two cognitive psychologists that have actually won the Nobel Prize in economics for their work on heuristics. And we'll talk about what each of these are in the next couple of slides. Okay, does anybody need some more time? Okay. So the representativeness heuristic is basically judging how likely something is based on how well it fits a prototype. So for example, has anybody here ever been inside of my office? Okay, a few people. Do you notice something kind of interesting about my office, aside from the fact that it's covered in tons of projects? Like, I have a lot of old student projects in my office, but does anybody else notice that there's something I don't have a lot of in my office? I don't have a lot of books in my office. My field is actually largely based on papers. And so please don't ever check my file cabinets. They are horrifying. But every now and then I will get a student who will come into my office and go, you don't really have a lot of books here. And you're right, I don't. But the fact that you notice that I don't have a lot of books in my office shows that you have an idea of what a professor's office should look like and what it should have in it. So you have this stereotype of what an office should look like, and you notice that mine doesn't really fit that. That is you using a representativeness heuristic at that moment. All right. Like, I'm trying to conduct a class and my dad is sending me photos of his trip to the Wizarding World of Hogwarts or the Wizarding World of Harry Potter.
Interesting.
I like heuristics. I think it's interesting. I don't know.
It's in the textbook.
Huh?
It's in the textbook.
Oh, I know, but it's way more fun to learn about it in class. Like, your book doesn't tell bad dad jokes like I do.
Book is very dry.
Well, yes. David Myers has been writing textbooks for a very long time. He wrote my social psychology textbook when I was in college and my psychology textbook when I was in AP Psych. And that was 21 years ago. To kind of put that into perspective. Okay, so you don't need to write this down. We're going to talk about Steve. Steve. So Steve is meek and tidy. He has a passion for detail. He is helpful to people, but he has little real interest in people or real world issues. So here is my question. And I'm going to preempt this right now, because I know that some of you were going to say, you can't make that judgment without really getting to know them. I'm going to preempt that. You have to pick one, because I know that that's truly the correct answer, but you have to pick one. Is Steve more likely to be a librarian or a salesperson? And you must pick one. This is a forced choice option. I am sorry that I'm forcing you. Normally I wouldn't, but I want to do that here. So raise your hand if you think Steve is more likely to be a librarian. Raise your hand if you think Steve is more likely to be a salesperson. Raise your hand if you did not raise your hand for either option, even though I told you to. Y'all are just daring to be different. Okay, so for those of you that picked that Steve is more likely to be a librarian, why? Why did you think Steve's more likely to be a librarian? Yeah, Danny.
It's hard to sell something that doesn't fix a real world issue, and if people can't tell you like them, you're not going to buy something.
Okay. Anybody else? Why is Steve more likely to be a librarian? Anybody? Yeah, Luca. Mm-hmm. And you have to be pretty detail oriented because you have the different cataloging systems like the Dewey Decimal System, the Library of Congress system. Now, for those of you that said Steve was more likely to be salesperson. Yeah, Kenna.
Because salespeople, no offense to like salespeople, but I usually like salespeople are a lot more likely to be paid based on how much they sell.
Okay.
So they're more likely to like put on like some sort of act in order to sell something that could like show that they don't really have as much of an interest in people or real world issues, and that they might just be faking it to sell something. Whereas with librarians, you have to actually like interact with people in order, and you're not being paid by how many books are rented out. So like not rented or borrowed or anything, but
You've
you're
read
still-
books.
but you're still like, you have to interact with people in order to do your job. So that's why
Okay.
on more than just a buy my thing way. So that's why I said salesperson.
Okay. Anybody else? Yeah, Anna.
Kind of going off of but mostly like specifically with salespeople, like I know there's kind of a variety of them, and like you're selling solar panels, all right, so you're different. But specifically like with car salesmen and like maybe like tech people, yeah, they're not caring like how that's maybe going to affect the environment after you've driven your car for 20 years, or if your car even lasts for 20 years. They're just trying to sell it. So yeah.
Okay. Now, how many of you picked salesperson simply because odds are pretty good in terms of sheer numbers that there are way more salespeople in the world than librarians? Nobody thinks about that, but that's really important. This is what is called a base rate of occurrence. Generally, if you know that there are more salespeople in the world than librarians, and you have Steve's profile ultimately doesn't matter. If there's more salespeople, the general odds are he's gonna be a salesperson, not because of anything with his personality, but just because of the base rate of occurrence. So I thought that some of you might find that pretty interesting, is that most of the time when we're trying to make these kind of judgments, we don't think about those base rates. So that was the representativeness heuristic. If you picked that Steve was more likely to be a librarian, you were following the representativeness heuristic. You were letting that basically help you make your judgment. We know that librarians do tend to be pretty detail oriented. Libraries tend to be pretty quiet. And so somebody who has that kind of personality profile might do better in a library. But it's not guaranteed that that's what Steve actually is. The representativeness heuristic can generally give us really good ideas of whether or not somebody is more or less likely to have a certain type of job, but it can also lead to errors and it can lead to stereotypes. Additionally, as I brought up, most people don't understand base rates of occurrence. If there are more salespeople than librarians in the world, Steve's probably more likely to be a salesperson, not a librarian. So in cognitive, we actually talk about something called Bayes' theorem. I am not going to show that to you because it's a lot of scary math, and we do like odds ratios and probabilities, and it's really gross. But we talk about that in a little bit more depth in cognitive if you're interested in learning more. Yeah, sorry I had to take off my hoodie. It was really hot and that hoodie is wool. It'll be better when it's cooler, but right now I'm like, it's stuffy. All right. Everybody good? Anybody needs some more time? Okay. Are y'all ready to try another one? Okay. So we've got the availability heuristic. So the representativeness heuristic is you basically saying, how likely is this based on how representative it is of something? On the other hand, the availability heuristic is basically when we judge how likely something is to occur based on how available it is in our memory. So basically, the more quickly that we can think of examples in our mind, the more common that we think it actually is. So for example, is there anybody here who is afraid of flying? Okay. All right. Keely, I'm going to pick on you. Okay. Oh, but not in a bad way. I'm just going to ask you a few questions. So have you flown on a plane before? Okay, you haven't, but you get in a car all the time, right? You know that you're more likely to end up with something bad happening to you in a car than a plane, right? But it's still scary, right? Because you've never done it. And here's the other thing. How many of you, so can y'all think of plane crashes that have recently happened a little bit more easily than you can think of car accidents? Okay, maybe I do. So I'll kind of give you an example. Every time I've been to Barcelona for the faculty, like the international trip, so I've been to Barcelona twice. Every time we came back from Barcelona, something bad happened involving a plane right before we were supposed to get on the plane. And I know that flying is safe, but I hate turbulence, A, And B, when you hear about those plane crashes and you're about to get on a plane, it's a little scary. So in 2015, the Germanwings disaster happened when we were flying back. That was when somebody basically, a pilot basically crashed a plane because, well, he was struggling with some things. So he crashed a whole plane full of people in the Alps. And then in 2019, the Ethiopian Air Boeing Max happened, where the plane basically crashed because of some problems with the equipment. And so the thing is that when plane crashes happen, they tend to make news, right? Because they're rare. So you think that because that happens, that it makes it more common than it is. But the truth of the matter, it really isn't. And in the case of turbulence, it's not a safety issue. It is a comfort issue. Pilots will try as much as possible to avoid rough air as much as possible, but but that at that point is a comfort issue, not a safety one. Yeah.
Isn't this applied to violent crimes been going down for decades?
But everybody thinks more crime is happening.
Yeah, because the news has been reporting on it.
Yes, that would absolutely be another example. Here's another one. How many of you go down south and you're afraid of shark attacks when you go to the beach? Okay, I grew up in Florida. I was terrified of shark attacks. They don't actually happen as often as you would think, but they get reported on so often that you think it's much more common than it actually is. Does that kind of make sense? Yeah, Anna.
Do you have that same fear of alligators?
Not really. Well, that's different. You can find in my hometown, if there's a retention pond or somewhere with a significant amount of water, you're probably going to find an alligator in it. Having said that, they generally will not mess with you unless you start messing with them or you get in on their turf. And generally that's the same with snakes. Like, I'm terrified of snakes, but they're going to be more afraid of you than you are of them. And they're going to try to run from you as much as possible. Generally, if you find alligators attacking humans unprovoked, it's because somebody thought it would be a good idea to go and feed an alligator. And I'm pretty sure the alligators think that we taste like chicken if you feed them things like chicken. But yeah, it's kind of the same idea. The more rare something is, the more it gets reported on, the more that you think about it easily in your mind and you think it's more common than it is. 1 in 5 people will be in a car accident at some point in their lives. And it's probably a higher number than that these days because driving got a lot worse during the pandemic. But because they're so common, you generally don't get a lot of reports on them unless something major happens with them. So that makes you think it's less common than it is. Does that kind of make sense? So here's an example that's pretty benign. Is the letter K more likely to occur in the first position of a word or a third position of a word? Who says first? Okay. Who says third? Who has no idea and just wants me to give you the answer? Okay, now most people, if prompted, will tell you it's first, because you can think of a lot of examples where you can think of a word where the first letter starts with K. Kick, kangaroo, kite, etc. It turns out the correct answer is it's actually more likely in the third position. And again, that's because you can think of more instances easily that start with K than K in the third position. Yeah.
I thought it was gonna have something to do with us also seeing the slide as you read it. And we were gonna be influenced by the word likely.
Oh, no, that's not a prime. But if you want to do something really cool, since you brought this up, I'm going to show you some priming. Are you ready? Okay. So I want you to do this with me. I'm going to demonstrate something really cool here. You can try it with your friends. Savannah, can you spell joke for me?
Yes.
Can you do it right now? Spell it for me.
Okay.
Can you spell spoke?
S-P-O-K-E.
Can you spell smoke?
S-M-O-K-E.
Can you spell toke?
T-O-O-K.
No, it's T-O-K-E.
I don't know
That's
the word
toke. Okay, It's related to weed. Okay. All right. So, let me think of another one. Can you spell stroke?
STRO.
What's the white part of an egg?
The yolk.
It is not the yolk, it is the white. Okay, do you kind of see what I did there? So I did those oak. What's the white part of an egg? And immediately your brain just wants to go, the yolk. So my undergrad mentor taught me that a long time ago, but the idea is I'm kind of biasing based on what things sound like. Yeah,
Wait, what is the white part of the egg?
it's the
called?
white.
Yeah, okay. It's like,
Egg whites.
It's like, but don't put any egg white in James Corden's wife's omelet. He'll get mad. Okay. All right. So one of the things that we find with heuristics is that heuristics tend to lead to overconfidence. This is our tendency to overestimate the accuracy of our beliefs and our judgments. So can anybody here, will you raise your hand if you believe you are an above average driver? Oh, cool. We have a lot of humility here. Nice. Now, a lot of people will tell you that they think they are an above average driver. I would say they should probably think very carefully when they say such things. So how many of you have had this happen though? Now that we are learning about psychology, you are learning so much that you can share with your friends and your family. And how many of you tend to walk out of this class and you're like, I am the most knowledgeable in psychology? How many of you are like that? Anybody like that? So sometimes we will occasionally get a student who thinks that because they had psychology that they know everything in psychology. Y'all, this is a survey class. And don't act, and I have a PhD. Don't think you know more than me. I don't even know that much. So one of the things that's kind of interesting is we get something called the Dunning-Kruger effect. Now, I will admit, not everybody finds that the Dunning-Kruger effect exists. But what we find is that people tend to be very overconfident in their abilities or in their knowledge when they are just beginning to learn something. And that's because they don't know what they don't know. You don't know what you don't know. But the more knowledge that you gain, the more feedback that you get about what you know. You will learn where your gaps are with the more knowledge that you gain. You will learn about what is incorrect with the more knowledge that you gain. So I can stand up here and tell you that, yes, I know a lot about memory. I know a lot about cognitive psychology, but as we move further away from cognitive psychology, I know less. And that's because a PhD is designed to make you a specialist. So I know where my gaps in my knowledge are. It's why there are some things I can answer for you and some things that I can't. But if you had asked me how much I knew when I finished my psychology major as an undergrad, I would have been like, I know everything. Because when you only have a little bit of knowledge, you're not aware of where your gaps are. Most people think they are above average drivers because we don't get good feedback on our performance unless we're taking a driver's test. If you had a highway patrol person in your car at every opportunity that was giving you immediate feedback, you would be much clearer on your driving ability. I actually have a Bluetooth thing in my car that tracks my driving, but it doesn't actually tell me how I'm doing in the moment. So again, it's unhelpful. If you want to get better knowledge about your abilities and your accuracy, you need that feedback and you need it as soon as possible. So here's something kind of interesting. What if I told you that surgeons tend to be a bit more overconfident in their abilities than meteorologists? Okay, why do you believe that?
You met a surgeon.
Yeah.
Not every surgeon has a God complex.
talked to enough surgeons, I've talked to meteorologists too, and they're like, yeah, we don't know how the weather moves, we're just giving a best guess. Have you ever heard a doctor say best guess?
Well,
Yeah.
it's also related to the feedback. It's also related to the feedback, right? Like the meteorologists are basically operating under a certain statistical model of how this weather is going to go. And guess what happens when they're wrong? They get immediate feedback, they change the model, and they're going to be wrong. I can't tell you how many times they've said that Nevada is going to get severe weather and then it misses us. And I think or we're going to get a lot of rain and it misses us because weather is wacky that way. But they get immediate feedback. They can modify their model and make different predictions. Now, here's the thing about a surgeon. If a surgeon is cutting into you, they're not going to know whether or not their abilities or their treatment worked until well after things have occurred. That's too late for them to get time to correct it. So it's partially, well, some of it sounds like it's stereotyping, but some of it is also that you just don't get good feedback, which is why if there's a skill that you want to develop, if you want to do well in this class, come and talk to me. I can give you feedback on things. The more feedback that you get, the more opportunities you get to improve. So I would encourage you, while getting criticized is hard and not fun, feedback is what enables you to grow. And that's even for people that are giving you feedback that is kind of rude. Take what you can from their feedback and leave out the rest of it. Okay, let's talk a little bit about framing. So our decisions and our judgments can also be affected depending upon how we frame an issue. So what is the best way for us to market ground beef? Should we market it as 25% fat or 27 or 75% lean? I don't know where that 27 came from. 25% fat or 75% lean? Why would we want to pick lean? It sounds healthier, huh?
That's the good part. It's like doing a bag of chips. You don't market it as 25% air.
Yeah,
That's telling them what they don't want in it.
it's closer to 40% air at this point. You open up a bag of Doritos, you're like, that's it?
Do we know why they keep getting more air? They say that it's to protect more chips from breaking before you get to them.
That's a lie.
It's
It's
a lie.
in,
The bags the
it's
same.
basically trying to make, if they gave you more chips or more chips, they'd have to charge you more. It's a way to kind of deal with the effects. Some of it's to deal with the effects of inflation.
Even if they're happy to charge you more for getting less chips. Some of it is blaming inflation on just wanting to make money.
Yep.
I would
Bunch of
also,
companies made a ton of money during inflation. It wouldn't be that bad if they weren't when inflation and started marking up their price.
Well, and some of it's stuff outside of our control too, gas prices, supply chain issues, all that good stuff. Not all of it. I know it's complicated. That's why like the business department, like the business majors, like the business professors can talk about that. Your IR professors can talk about it. I am not that person. Like I specifically avoided economics classes and business classes in college. Probably should have taken them, didn't take them. Okay, so framing matters. So for example, if I'm talking about a virus that is ripping through the city, it was really hard to not use it was really hard to use this example for the past 2 years. I feel a little more comfortable with it now. Like we're not talking about COVID. We're talking about like some like apocalyptic virus that's basically going to destroy a good chunk of the city. And you have a cure, but it's only going to save maybe 200 people. When you frame things in terms of saving versus these many people will die, it changes how people respond. The way that you frame things affects how people respond. How many of y'all drink whole milk? Okay, a few of you. Now, does anybody drink 1 or 2%? Why do you drink 1 or 2%?
because my mom made me drink it.
Okay, now some people will tell you it's because it has less fat, which is true, it does, but whole milk is only about 4% milk fat. So whole, like calling it 1% or 2% makes it seem like it's a lot healthier, but it's just like a 2% difference in milk fat. That's it.
25% difference in the price of the half gallon.
And this is, and this is why I will keep drinking almond milk. All right. So I want to talk about belief perseverance now, or belief perseverance. So how many of you believe something that has been disproven, or there's evidence that this is not a thing, but you still believe in it? Can anybody give me an example? Yeah, Luca. Yes. How many of you still labor under the idea that Pluto is a planet? Darn you, Neil deGrasse Tyson. Okay, what's another belief?
I taught space exploration. It's not wrong to think of it as a planet because within the field of studying space, different specialties consider it different things.
Uh-huh.
And that's based on, you know, are we studying massive planets or what composes them, or are we studying gravitational? It depends,
Mhm.
even within the field. So people, even experts, still consider it a planet. It just depends on the expert.
Mhm.
I was just gonna say, thinking like honorary planet status as sort of a people like.
Uh-huh. Anybody else, a belief that you have, even though it has been shown to be incorrect? Yeah, Hannah.
It's not one that I believe, I promise, but Holocaust deniers.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I was gonna say we could definitely get into how many of you believe that the birds work for the bourgeoisie? I'm sorry. I'm satire. I know it's a joke. Like the birds aren't real thing. I'm just like this is where I definitely feel a disconnect with Gen Z, where I'm like, oh my gosh, y'all, this is not that funny. Like, but you probably know people that believe things like the moon landing didn't happen, the world's flat. Like we've got so much evidence that the world is round. We have so much evidence that the world is round, and yet, despite all of that contrary evidence, many of us will continue to cling to those beliefs.
Ghosts.
Yeah, ghosts. Yeah.
Horoscopes.
Yeah, and we'll talk a little bit about horoscopes in a couple of chapters. Yeah, story.
It would be fair to say that they have good evidence to.
That is, and that is also true. Mm-hmm.
That's like something.
Uh-huh. Well, well, and this is just me, but when it comes to things like that, I am a little bit more inclined to believe people who have expertise in those areas. So if I wanted evidence for the fact that the earth was round, I would want to make sure I was talking with physicists, geologists, and the like, rather than just some random person who, like, who's the guy, B.O.B.? I would not listen to B.O.B. Yeah, Cora.
Okay, first off, what I'm about to say, I'm not trying to start a fight.
Okay,
Oh, no.
okay,
Religion,
okay,
all religions.
okay.
Because they all focus on beliefs,
Well, yeah,
and they've persevered ever since the beginning of each religion, save for the ones that have been wiped out, and they've also surpassed some areas of science and some cultures that believe it. So,
well, uh-huh.
exists.
Well, and that's fine. And I would say, and I definitely don't want it to start a thing.
Yeah, that's what I'm.
No, and
I'm
it's,
not trying to start a
no,
fight,
it's
but-
okay. It's okay. So this is where, so I will mention that I am religious, but I put faith in a very different category from things like science. And even then, I will tell you, there's some things I'm like, yeah, this is a little weird for me. That's a little weird for me. And I would say generally, believe what you would like to believe, even if it's that there's nothing. Believe what you would like to believe, as long as it's not hurting people. And that's, of course, where it gets complicated as well. Yeah.
Those people that believe that zodiac signs determine your personality.
Yeah, horoscopes. I will say I do read horoscopes, but yeah, I'm like, psh, It's like, how do you know that Taylor Swift and I are going to have the exact same kind of day just because we have the exact same zodiac sign? It doesn't make sense. Okay, but I want to talk about a more mundane example. And folks, thank you very much. I hope that in having this brief little example, if you do believe that the earth is flat or that the moon landing is not, that the moon landing didn't happen, I hope I did not offend you. Okay. But what we tend to find is that our current beliefs are ultimately going to affect the evidence that is related to those beliefs. So back in 1987, Kunda actually gave both male and female participants. Remember, this was before it was much more common to have like a variety of different gender identities. So we're dealing with male and female participants here. And they're basically presented with an article that links caffeine to breast cancer. Now, is there anybody here who doesn't drink a lot of caffeine? Okay. So for those of you that are not caffeine drinkers, how do you think, would you be pretty like, yeah, that makes sense? Kind of, maybe? Well, you don't really have a lot of, well, and the thing is, you don't drink caffeine. This would not personally affect any of your beliefs, right? It would, if anything, it would confirm that it's good that you didn't start. Is anybody here a pretty hardcore caffeine drinker? How would y'all probably evaluate this? You'd agree with it? Would it make you change your behavior? Probably not. Is there anybody that might look at the evidence and be like, I need more to really make a determination? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Especially if the evidence would potentially make you have to change your behavior and give up what you love. And additionally, because they gave this to male and female participants just in general, does breast cancer in men happen? Yes, it's very uncommon though. On the other hand, breast cancer is much more likely for those who are assigned female at birth. As a result, this might affect them more. So let's see what happens. It turns out that the male participants evaluated the article similarly. They were like, yeah, that's pretty accurate. With our female participants, it basically broke down by caffeine use. If they were low caffeine users, they were similar in their performance ratings to the male participants. If the women were high caffeine consumers, they had much more skepticism because if the article were true, they would have to change their behavior. And we really don't like to change if we don't have to.
But is that true? I'm just wondering.
It's just an example. So this was a sample article. Let me take a look though. I can do a quick search while y'all are finishing taking your notes.
I tend to just generally want more information about the link causes cancer when it's like a fairly normal everyday thing. I'm not saying that it won't, but you see articles like that very frequently. And so I feel like it's just something that's worth looking into a little bit extra and what it actually, like what the study looks like.
Well, a study back in 2015 actually found there's a connection between coffee and lower breast cancer risk if you are postmenopausal. More highly caffeinated coffee was found to reduce breast cancer risk. Higher consumption was related to a higher reduction in risk. Yeah, well,
Even that, I'm skeptical about.
There were studies about how how much breast cancer is affected by genetics versus just like.
oh, the heritability. Oh, absolutely. There's heritability
That,
estimates.
like, would coffee actually have that much, or caffeine versus maybe like the people that are drinking just maybe like coffee more than you don't get.
Well, and that's where it gets kind of tricky. So when we're talking about genetic risks, remember that genes are basically responsible for producing and turning on different types of proteins. Genes are only going to express themselves in certain types of environments. So here's the thing about caffeine though, and I don't know about y'all, you are technically putting your body under a little bit of physical stress. you are kickstarting that fight or flight system. And some of us are more sensitive to it than other people. If you put we know that stress can often lead to the production of those proteins and thus turn on those genes, so to speak. But it's very, very complicated. There's a lot we need to learn. Okay. We're done talking about problem solving, judgment, and decision making. We are now talking about language. It is primarily one of the #1 ways that we communicate with other people. Now, let's be very clear. When we think about language, we often think about speaking, but language is not just about what we speak. It is about what we write, and it's about what we gesture. That helps us communicate with ourselves, because some of us do use language to talk to ourselves. And it's also about sharing ideas with other people. There are quite a few people that believe that our intelligence and our knowledge as a collective species really accelerated once we learned language, because we could start sharing our thoughts, our ideas, our beliefs with other people. You got 3 minutes.
Are we gonna talk about sign language and Esperanto?
We are not. I'm sorry. We just don't have the time. It's a survey course.
About Esperanto. So it was made by a Polish dude in like the 1970s or 80s in order to be like one world language that took cues from a bunch of different languages. And he tried to make it universal. So there's still a bunch of communities that speak it. There's one like.
I bet Dr.
microfiche in
Quick
the
talks.
US that has
I
one.
bet Dr. Quick talks about it in language and culture.
I'll ask her in first year writing something. And yeah, Esperanto is meant to be like one, like instead of instituting an ordinary language that some people would already know and everyone else would have to learn, made Esperanto so everyone would have to.
And it's still required on any kind of military examination going into, say, code breaking.
Uh-huh.
We're required to learn Esperanto.
Huh.
It's supposed to be the simplest language to learn.
Yeah, as somebody who is learning Korean for fun, like Esperanto has got to be easier. Okay, so we're gonna probably stop on this slide. So we're gonna talk very quickly next time about the stages in which children learn their native languages. Generally, once children speak their first words, they learn about 3,500 words a year. And by the time that you graduate high school, it is estimated that you know up to 60,000 different words. All right. So that is all we have time for today. We'll talk about the stages of language development, and we'll start talking about the development of IQ tests. Yeah, I know. Have a good day, everybody. I will email you the link to this recording very soon.